Stephen looked more relaxed than ever, while Edmund was growing more anxious by the second. Edmund realized that he'd been monitored since he arrived in the U.S. Stephen hadn't shown up until the very end, meaning that the tricks he'd pulled so far weren't worth his effort. Before, the palace that had lost to Kylan didn't seem as fearsome as the rumors had made them out to be. Now that he knew that the Northern Guardian had lost on purpose, their invincibility had returned tenfold. The palace had slaughtered high-ranking officials around the world. He could be next. Stephen glanced at Harlan, Jim, and their friends. Was the auction entertaining enough for you? They shrank back, too afraid to answer. They were regretting their decision to come here today. The Fukuda family wasn't doing much better. Their submissive attitudes were a stark contrast to their excitement during the auction. What should we do with them? Nora asked. Stephen's gaze swept over Edmund and Horace. The organizers and participants of today's auctions will be killed without mercy. He turned to look at Harlan and the others. As for those who sought entertainment from watching my family suffer, none of them will be spared. You can't kill me, Edmund stuttered. Why not? I know you used to be the commander-in-chief, and now you're the Grand Palace Master, but I'm from Cadis, and I'm famous there. Mr. Horace is the owner of the Blackwater Financial Group from Warhawk. We hold prestigious positions, and we have the authority to influence national decisions. If you kill us, you'll have to face unspeakable consequences. Horace spoke up. He's right. We are representatives of our respective countries. If you harm us, you'll be starting a war between the U.S., Cadis, and Warhawk. Why don't the three of us sit down and have a good talk instead? Doesn't the U.S. value peace above everything else? Edmund nodded profusely. Whatever you want, just tell us. Mr. Horace owns all 5 oil fields in the Middle East. If you're interested, he can give you one. Horace shot Edmund an incredulous look. He hadn't even offered to give up his oil fields. Why was Edmund volunteering on his behalf? Either way, his cards had been laid on the table. His life was more important than his oil fields. Right, but besides the oil fields, you can also ask for anything you want. We'll agree as long as we can afford it. Peace is the basis of wealth. The palace can sweep the world whenever they want, but they have to make some friends along the way, right? Edmund thought he was making a convincing suggestion, but when he finished talking, the atmosphere turned awkward. The 4 guardians were giving him strange looks. Stephen's expression darkened, and the air turned frigid again. Edmund, do you think I'm an idiot? You kidnapped my family and wanted to auction them off. And now you want us to be friends? You'll never be worthy of my friendship. He brushed past Edmund with Valeria in his arms. Get rid of them. Understood, Mr. Adams, the 4 guardians replied. They'd never seen Stephen so angry before. Edmund and Horace attempted the final struggle when the 4 guardians and the rest of the group surrounded them. You should think this through, Stephen. If you kill me, Cadis won't leave you alone. The Blackwater Financial Group won't stand by and do nothing if I die. The so-called elites of the upper class were more terrified than ordinary people when faced with the threat of death. Stephen turned around with a smile. You two are influential, but your enemies will be thrilled with your deaths. Edmund and Horace turned deathly pale. Their businesses were prominent, but they weren't all powerful. They had many enemies in their respective countries who were much stronger than them. The enemy of one's enemy was a friend. Their enemies would be happy to lend Stephen their assistance. They wouldn't be the only ones to die. The forces behind them would be uprooted. An ordinary person wouldn't be capable of this, but that wasn't the case for Stephen. Not too long ago, he'd taken the Northern Guardian with him to the island state and massacred the officials. Stephen turned away with a wave of his hand. The members of the palace drew their weapons, and under Nor's lead, they charged into the crowd. Bodies fell with each swing of their daggers. Harlan, Jim, and the Fukuda family couldn't escape the bloodbath. Edmund and Horace's bodyguards formed a protective circle around their employees. They were capable of fighting on par with Grand Masters, but neither group was worth Nor's attention. The other members of the palace were enough to deal with them. Several slashes of their weapons later, Edmund and Horace were the only ones left standing. Nor landed the final blow. Their heads rolled with one slash of his dagger. Everyone who participated in the auction was taken care of in less than a minute. If it weren't for the fact that bloodshed and gore were inappropriate for children, Stephen would have taken care of them himself. Because of them, his family had almost been auctioned off for a life of torture. Stephen was waiting outside the venue with Valeria in his arms. He'd covered his ear with his hand and held her close to muffle the sounds. The commotion died down in less than a minute, signaling the end of the conflict. "Are you scared, Valeria?" He was worried that the screams had frightened her. "I'm not afraid," Valeria declared. "Those people were the bad guys. They deserved to die." Her fearless courage was rare for a child her age. She reminded Stephen of when he was young. Maybe she'd inherited that trait. Valeria stared up at him. Her large, bright eyes searched his face. "Daddy, are you feeling better?" Stephen gave her a smile. "I'm completely recovered. I can beat up the bad guys now." Valeria waved her arms excitedly. "Mommy told me to stop calling you because she wants you to rest and get better. I can call you whenever I want now. I want to tell Mommy and Grandma the good news." "Sure, let's go see them," Stephen said with a laugh. Just as he was about to look for Kim and Victoria, a voice called out to him from the darkness. "Please wait a moment." Stephen turned around with Valeria in his arms and was surprised to see a few members of the Leviathan unit. The last time he'd come in contact with them was during his duel with Kylan. They greeted him respectfully. "It's good to see you, Commander Adams." "I'm not the Commander-in-Chief anymore. It's not appropriate for you to address me with this level of formality." The Leviathan unit was under the command of the Supreme Leader. Their organization was small in numbers, but they held a distinguished status. "It's more than appropriate," the leader of their unit replied. "You have always been the commander of the United States." He gestured to the palace members inside the venue. It dawned on Stephen that the Leviathan unit had found out that he was the Grand Palace Master. The Supreme Leader was wise and experienced. He must have realized that there was something off about Nora's defeat during his match with Kylan. To confirm his suspicions, he'd sent the Leviathan unit to track the palace in secret. That was when they discovered the true identity of the Grand Palace Master and confirmed that the palace was not an enemy. Valeria answered in Stephen's stead. "Daddy is the commander. He always will be." Stephen laughed and pinched her cheek. "May I ask what instructions you have for me?" The Leviathan unit was a secretive group. They didn't appear in public for no reason. If they were here, there had to be something serious going on. "The Supreme Leader has instructed us to pass on a message. It's a blessing that you're alive. As the Grand Palace Master, he hopes you'll continue to do your best for the country." The palace had half of the world's wealth and influence at their disposal, but Stephen was also the Commander-in-Chief. He had to follow orders of the Supreme Leader. "Of course. Anything else?" "Many big events have taken place recently, and the people have been speculating the truth behind your death. There are some who believe that you're not dead. It's only a matter of time before suspicions arise. The Supreme Leader believes that it is appropriate time to reveal yourself. However, your full recovery can't be exposed." "That's true. Doesn't take a genius to link the events back to me. But from what you're saying, it sounds like the Supreme Leader thinks it would be a good idea to stop hiding. Why is that?" "These are hostile factions that lurk in the dark. It'll be dangerous to leave them be. You're disabled and harmless on the surface, but your true identity is the Grand Palace Master. You can investigate our enemy in secret." Many of these factions were located overseas, but there was quite a number in the U.S. Sending Stephen to deal with them was the best option. He possessed heaven-defying strength. In addition, he'd made countless enemies when he won the war and saved the country. Now that he wasn't the commander anymore and was known to be disabled from an injury, his enemies would take the initiative to expose themselves. "I understand. Nothing gets past the Supreme Leader. He's aware that those we dispose of overseas are only the tip of the iceberg. The true hostile factions have yet to show themselves." The biggest mystery was Devil Hall's identity and their goal. Stephen thought he'd wiped them out during the war, but they made a comeback 6 years later. How had they been capable of that? The only person who had the answers was Silas, but his lips were sealed even in the face of death. The U.S. would never be truly safe as long as Devil Hall remained a mystery. Please tell the Supreme Leader that I'll heed his order, Stephen said. Even if the people thought of him as a traitor, he would never abandon him. This was the responsibility he'd taken on when he became the Commander-in-Chief. However, being able to reunite with his family and stay with them out in the open was also important. It didn't matter if he had to pretend like he was disabled. Commander Adams, thank you for your dedication to the country. The Leviathan unit hadn't expected Stephen to agree so easily. He was the Grand Palace Master and leader of a powerful organization. It wasn't an exaggeration to consider his position on par with the Supreme Leader's, and yet he'd agreed without hesitation. They were moved by his loyalty. The Supreme Leader's order is top secret. Aside from him, a few other Leviathan unit members and you, no one else can know. You must carry out the operation with the highest level of secrecy in mind. Keep your recovery a secret, including those who are closest to you. I understand. Stephen looked down at his daughter. Valeria, Daddy needs help to carry out a secret mission. Can you promise to keep my recovery a secret? I'll be able to catch more of the bad guys and avenge Mommy and Grandma. Okay, Valeria nodded seriously. Do I have to keep it a secret from Mommy and Grandma too? Yes, can you do that for Daddy? Of course, Valeria said resolutely, sounding like a young adult. She held out her pinky. Stephen smiled and linked his own pinky with hers, sealing the promise. According to the plan, we'll take your daughter to your family and send someone to contact you, the leader of the Leviathan unit said. All right. Stephen set Valeria on the ground. Daddy needs to wait until tomorrow to come home. These nice people will help you find Mommy and Grandma. Remember our promise, okay? Valeria nodded as if she'd taken on a huge responsibility. The Leviathan unit found her actions adorable. Valeria, I'm your daddy's acquaintance, the leader said. Can I carry you? We'll look for your Mommy and Grandma together. Valeria looked up and held out her arms. Okay. After the Leviathan unit left with Valeria in tow, the four Guardians appeared. They'd overheard their conversation with Stephen, but they couldn't interrupt without his permission. You're fully recovered, Mr. Adams. Is it worth the trouble to pretend like you're confined to a wheelchair? Aston asked. The United States is my home. Whatever my identity may be, I'll always be a soldier. Protecting the country's my duty. It'll always be worth it. Norris shook his head in amazement. I'd lose my mind if I was stuck in a wheelchair all day long. That's why you'll never compare to Mr. Adams, Aston said. When he lost to Kylan on purpose, the big shots hiding behind the scenes revealed themselves, like Jameson, Silas, and the rest of the Alliance. The Supreme Leader sees value in pretending to be weak, which is why they want him to continue that role. Your analysis is spot on, Stephen agreed. It's not easy to investigate the hidden factions in our country. We have to lure them out of hiding. There are numerous mysteries waiting to be solved, and we've only scratched the surface. The Leviathan unit took Valeria to Kim and Victoria and released them. Two of their members had split from the group to find Jasmine and the other women Edmund had taken captive. Kim and Victoria were relieved that Valeria was safe and sound. Are you hurt anywhere? Kim asked, holding out her arms. Valeria crawled into her embrace. No, I'm fine. Kim couldn't understand what was going on. Edmund and Horace would never let them go without a fight. She put Valeria down and crouched in front of her. Valeria, can you tell Mommy what happened? Children were so easily fooled. She suspected that Edmund and Horace were using Valeria for another one of their dirty tricks. I'm fine, Mommy, Valeria repeated. She remembered the promise she'd made with Stephen. She couldn't tell anyone about him, including Kim and Victoria. But Kim was her mother, and she knew her too well. She could tell that Valeria was hiding something from the look in her eyes. Valeria, tell Mommy the truth. Remember what I taught you? It's not good to lie. What happened? Valeria wrung her hands and stared at the floor. Her hesitation confirmed Kim's suspicion. The Leviathan unit interjected. Miss Kim, we're the ones who resolved today's matter. Kim turned to look at them. She'd been so relieved that Valeria was safe that she'd forgotten they weren't alone. You are... We're the Leviathan unit. Kim recalled the day of Stephen's confrontation with the Adams family. The Leviathan unit had shown up at that time. They worked for the Supreme Leader. The leader of the Leviathan unit sensed her doubt. We discovered that Edmund Joffrey from Cadiz had been openly auctioning children within our borders, he explained. We took action immediately to prevent any more harm to our citizens. I see. During our investigation, we discovered that your husband is alive and that he was framed. We've reported it to the higher-ups, and they've issued an order to clear his name once more. We will make a public announcement to rectify your husband's reputation. Kim and Victoria couldn't have been happier. Stephen wouldn't be known as a traitor anymore. Mr. Adams has contributed much to our country. He'll never forsake loyalty. He will always be a citizen of the U.S. Can he come back? Kim asked hopefully. Yes, the Supreme Leader has granted him permission. He'll be back by tomorrow. I have one last piece of good news for you. Mr. Adams is recovering well. There's a chance he might make a full recovery in the future. How is he doing now? He can't walk yet, but he can move around. His miraculous recovery came about because of Dr. Sloan. Dr. Sloan? Kim asked, confused. When Stephen was in the hospital after his duel with Kylan, Lionel had told him that there was nothing more he could do. Yes, there was nothing he could do for Mr. Adams back then. But after you two returned to Los Angeles, he contacted other specialists in his field and conducted in-depth research regarding Mr. Adams's condition. They found a breakthrough and implemented a treatment plan. It's precisely because of Dr. Sloan that Mr. Adams was able to recover to this extent. So that's what happened, Kim said. I'll have to express my gratitude to Dr. Sloan the next time I see him. Is it true that there's a possibility of him making a full recovery in the future? Victoria asked. Yes, that was Dr. Sloan's assessment. I believe that with his medical skills and Mr. Adams's resilient physique, that day will come sooner than you think. Kim and Victoria were delighted by the news. The Leviathan unit regarded them with a smile. This was the first stage of their plan. They would spread rumors that there was a possibility that the former commander would recover. The news would shock the world, because not only would this mean that he was alive, but there was a chance that his strength would return. Stephen had already found the culprit behind the scenes, Devil Hall, but there were many factions that were hidden even deeper. If news of his condition was spread, they would expose themselves for a chance to get rid of him once and for all. The next day, Stephen put on a big show of returning to Washington, D.C. in a wheelchair. The Leviathan unit had tipped off his return to the mainstream media reporters. They were necessary for spreading the news across the country. Sure enough, after their initial shock that the former commander was still alive, they published a series of articles on the respective agencies' websites, reporting that the former commander had returned. In a matter of minutes, the news went viral. The former commander was alive. He'd survived the desert and returned to the U.S. in a wheelchair. The United States' ex-commander-in-chief quickly occupied the top spot on the list of the most searched items on the internet. In less than an hour, news of the former commander's return to the U.S. had spread across the country and the world. The current commander, Kylan, had defeated the palace recently. He'd put a stop to their momentum. And now, the former commander, who'd been rumored to have died in the desert, was alive and had returned to the U.S. He was in a wheelchair, but there was a high chance that he would make a full recovery. Once that happened, the U.S. would have two powerhouses, Commander Gale and the former Commander Adams. Who would be a match for them? With them around in peak conditions, no one would attack the country. Needless to say, the hostile forces overseas weren't pleased with the news. Several factions in the U.S. felt the same way. Kim, Mom, I'm back. Stephen had just arrived at the villa in the district. Kim and Victoria had gone out to welcome him home. They threw themselves at him and burst into tears. He patted them with a smile. I'm alive and I'm recovering well. Why are you crying? I thought I'd never see you again, Kim managed to say between sobs. I'm coming back for good. I won't leave you again. I still need the wheelchair, but with me here, I won't let anyone mess with you. Victoria sighed. You just came back. Take it easy. Don't overdo it. Valeria came running and burrowed into Stephen's arms. I believe in Daddy. He picked her up and put her on his lap. "I won't let you down." Kim and Victoria held back another round of tears at the sight of Stephen and Valeria being so close. They decided to go out and shop for groceries to prepare a celebratory feast. Stephen and Valeria stayed home. They were watching TV in the living room when Valeria suddenly thought of something. "Daddy, Mommy said I'm a bad girl." "Why? Did something happen?" Stephen asked, worried that something serious had gone down in his absence. "I made a promise with Daddy, but Mommy said that children shouldn't lie." "So that's what happened." Stephen patted her head. "Remember what Daddy said yesterday? We have to keep my condition a secret to catch the bad guys. When they're caught, Mommy will compliment you for being smart." Valeria looked up at him, anticipation bright in her eyes. "Really?" "Yeah, why would Daddy lie to you?" Kim and Victoria came back, carrying bags of groceries. "What are you two whispering about?" "I was telling Valeria that we'll never be separated again." Kim broke into a smile. "I'm holding you to that promise." Stephen's heartwarming reunion with his family contrasted with the storm brewing outside. Chaos had ensued with the news of his return. It caused a chain reaction around the world. The pictures of the former commander in a wheelchair were enough to keep them up at night, even when his back was turned to the camera. Stephen was aware that the peace wouldn't last forever. He would have to make his move once the hidden factions came to the surface. The news reached Kylan and his students. They were sitting around a table at the mansion with a newspaper in front of them. The headlines mentioned the former commander's return to the U.S., and there was a large picture of him in a wheelchair plastered on the cover. His back was turned, so his face was obscured. The thought that Stephen was alive did cross my mind, but I didn't think it would turn out to be true. There were many who weren't convinced when I won our duel. Him being alive works in my favor. I'll wait for him to recover and challenge him to another duel. No one will question me again. "Why do you care about the minority?" Raksha asked. "You defeated the Northern Guardian. There's no one who doesn't know your name." "You don't understand," Kingsley said. "Mr. Gale wants to shut down all their doubts. Those who questioned him after his duel with Stephen won't stop until he wins a second time. With that victory, and with his match with the Palace, no one will doubt him again." Kylan nodded. "It's true that I don't need to duel Stephen again, but I can't stop feeling anxious. During our first duel, half of the public claimed that I won because Stephen wasn't in peak condition. After he recovers, we'll have a fair fight that no one can question." The world overseas was in an uproar when they received the news of the former commander's return. The hostile forces came together to discuss countermeasures. Is he not human? Even the prisoners from the prison of fiends couldn't kill him. Someone like him will remain a threat as long as he exists. If it weren't for him, the U.S. would have been ours a long time ago. Fortunately, he hasn't recovered to the point where he can walk. We have to seize this chance and kill him before he recovers. Otherwise, we'll all die. If Stephen were dead, they would only have to deal with Kylan. Kylan was insanely strong, but that was nothing they couldn't handle with a few schemes. But Stephen was different. His martial arts and his brains were top-notch. He had no weaknesses, even if he was disabled. Edmund and Horace's bodies were sent back to Cadus and Warhawk, respectively. The tycoon behind Edmund was infuriated by his grandson's death. "Who did this? Investigate Edmund's death immediately. I don't care who it was. I'll kill them and make them accompany my grandson in death." His subordinate hurried to report. "I heard the former commander of the U.S. has returned to the country. His name was cleared, and he's no longer known as a traitor. Perhaps he was the culprit." A brief instance of fear crossed the tycoon's face, but he quickly composed himself. "He's disabled. He wouldn't be capable of killing Edmund. But since he's alive, I'll take care of him and the culprit at the same time." A different scene was playing out in Warhawk's Backwater Financial Group. Horace's death had left behind an empty position. Warhawk advocated for the strong. Those who wanted to take over the company had to avenge Horace as a prerequisite. Only then would the employees support them. The hidden clans in the U.S. also started to move. The first to leave seclusion was the Chevalier family. Under normal circumstances, they would have needed to obtain permission before heading out, and they would have been restricted by a time limit. However, Jameson and his top 4 students hadn't returned since they left. After an investigation, the Chevalier family discovered they had been killed outside. The Chevalier family couldn't accept this. The aristocrats possessed the strength to take over the outside world if they so desired. The death of an aristocrat outside was a huge scandal and a serious stain on their reputation. The head of the Chevalier family asked his subordinates to find the culprit who killed Jameson and his students. They broke the rules of seclusion, and group after group set foot in the outside world. This also caused a chain reaction. The other clans didn't want to be left behind. They used the excuse of assisting the Chevalier family's investigation and sent their people outside. The hidden clans had been living in seclusion for 250 years, but the rules of seclusion no longer held any weight. Stephen's return to the U.S. had caused a butterfly effect to spiral out of control. As the head of the number 1 family in the country, Terrence had been one of the first people to receive news of Stephen's return. He's not dead? How lucky can one person be? I heard he's recovering well, the butler reported. He's not completely paralyzed. From my understanding, Dr. Sloan has concluded that after a period of recuperation, there's a high chance it'll make a full recovery. Trepidation flickered in Terrence's eyes. Stephen was close to invincible in his previous state. If he recovered, what would happen to the Addams family? They would be his first target once he regained his former strength. I can't let him live. As long as he's alive, he'll always be a threat to our family. We couldn't touch him before, but things are different now, the butler said. He hasn't regained full control of his body. We have sufficient time to get rid of him before he recovers. There's no time to lose. Just as Terrence was about to give his instructions, a strange sound came from outside the door. Who is it? I'll go outside and take a look. The butler opened the door. Laurel barged in, trembling and muttering inarticulately. Terrence shot the butler a displeased look. Didn't I tell you to look after her? After almost losing face in front of Edmund, he'd taken precautions and asked the mansion staff to keep an eye on Laurel at all times. I've asked the maids to monitor Miss Laurel closely, the butler explained. But it's hard for them to handle her given her condition. That wasn't the only reason. Terrence had ordered them to stop her from causing trouble, but she was his wife, and she was a member of the Phoenix family. The mansion staff couldn't treat her with disrespect or carelessly lay a hand on her. But the butler didn't say that part out loud. Forget it, Terrence snapped. She can do whatever she wants as long as she stays home. Let's go back to our original discussion. Stephen has to die. He'd barely gotten the words out before Laurel started shouting and gesturing wildly. He couldn't understand a single word, but the fear on her face didn't escape his attention. A piece of the puzzle clicked. Laurel gets agitated every time we mention Stephen. As if to prove Terrence's point, she became more frantic. It was clear that she was afraid of something, or someone. The shaman said that Laurel's condition resulted from shock. She might be acting like this because of her son's death. Stephen was the one who killed him, so that's why she has a reaction whenever we bring up his name. That makes sense. I feel the same way as Laurel. I want to go crazy from grief like her, but I can't. I have to avenge Johan. Laurel started gesturing again, but Terrence didn't pay her any mind. He'd come to the conclusion that she'd lost her mind from losing her beloved son. I've heard that the aristocrats have been showing up recently, the butler said. Their presence will affect our family's status. They've been in seclusion for 250 years. Why now? The aristocrat who was killed recently is from the Chevalier family. He's Kylan's teacher. 4 of his students were killed as well. He was related to our current commander. Even the Addams family couldn't match up to Kylan's martial arts. Terrence couldn't think of anyone who could take down his teacher and 4 of his fellow students. No wonder the aristocrats were leaving seclusion to investigate. Laurel held her head with both hands. She curled up in the corner and trembled nonstop. Terrence was getting annoyed with the distraction. Take her away. I can't concentrate with her here. The butler called the maids over, but they had a hard time bringing Laurel out of the room. She kept struggling to break free from their grip. The maids were afraid to use too much strength. "Laurel, I'll definitely avenge our son," Terrence promised. "Drag her out," he ordered the maids. With Laurel gone, he felt more at peace. "What are you planning to do about the aristocrats?" the butler asked. "I don't know. Too many things have been happening recently. An aristocrat died, and the Chevalier family came outside. It would be best that after they finish their investigation, they'll go back into hiding. But an aristocrat possesses inhuman strength. It's impossible to predict the consequences. If our family's involved, it'll become a matter of life or death." The aristocrats aren't the only problem. Derek died mysteriously, and we still don't know who the culprit is. And now, Edmund and Horace have turned up dead. Terrence felt a headache coming on, but he couldn't figure out what was going on. "I hope this has nothing to do with the Addams family. Keep monitoring the situation and report to me if anything happens. As for that cripple, I'll deal with him myself." "Dr. Sloan, are you confident that Stephen can make a full recovery?" Kylan had invited Lionel to his home to discuss Stephen's condition. "Are you worried that he'll recover and take your position away?" "No, why would I be? I won against Stephen once, and I can do it again." "Is that so? Why did you call me here today?" "I need to fight Stephen one more time. When will he recover?" "It's hard to say. His physique and willpower are incredible, but certain things can't be rushed. With the current treatment plan, he'll recover at his own pace. That is, unless a special medicine exists to speed up the process." Kylan's face lit up. He signaled for Kingsley to come over and whispered a few words. Kingsley nodded and left the room. He returned with an antique box in hand. Kylan took the box and handed it to Lionel. It's a healing salve. Its effects are immediate. Why don't you open it and take a look?" Lionel opened the box. The scent of medicinal herbs filled the air. Even with his vast knowledge and experience, he didn't know what ingredients had been used to make this salve. "Kingsley, demonstrate its effects," Kylan said. Kylan took out a dagger and made a small cut on his arm. He opened the container of salve and smeared the medicine on his wound. The broken skin was stitched together, and in less than 10 seconds, the wound had completely closed. Aside from the blood, there was no sign that the skin had been cut at all. Lionel's eyes widened. Is this the Golden Sage salve? He'd only ever heard of this salve in legends. It had extraordinary healing properties. There were rumors that the Hidden Clans were the only ones who had this medicine. There were two main reasons as to why the Hidden Clans would always be one step ahead of the outside world. First, their martial arts were superior. Second, they had ancient medicines in their possession. This was the only way to ensure that every aristocrat was a powerhouse. As a member of the aristocratic families, Kylan naturally had a lot of Golden Sage salve. It was rare in the outside world, but all too common among the Hidden Clans. "Yes, this is Golden Sage salve," Kylan confirmed. "Stephen's injuries are severe. I'm no expert, but I'm guessing the recovery time will decrease by half." "That's right," Lionel said. "Mr. Addams will recover in no time. Your second duel with him will come sooner than expected." "Good. Kingsley, find Stephen in Washington, D.C. and give him the medicine." Kim went back to work. The Wyvern Group and Tanith Corporation had been returned to her after Edmund and Horace disappeared. The merger and name change had been canceled. Kim had called Jasmine, Annika, and the other executives who'd been fired back to work. The two companies regained their vitality in less than a week. The business continued to expand. Today, Stephen had decided to pay a visit to the Wyvern Group with Valeria. The Wyvern Group was his blood, sweat, and tears, and Kim had done a good job developing the company when he wasn't around. She also had two capable assistants, Jasmine and Annika. Stephen didn't need to step in. The only thing he needed to do was protect his family and the people around him on the sidelines. At the same time, he he would wait for the hostile factions to make their move. But to his surprise, it wasn't the hostile factions who came knocking on their doors. It was Kylan's 4 students. Kim tensed when they came into her office. She didn't have a good impression of them after how they kicked Stephen out of the country a while ago. Miss Kim, you don't have to be so nervous, Kingsley said. Mr. Gale sent us here to help Mr. Adams. That's unexpected, Stephen remarked. That didn't align with Kylan's way of doing things. Kim, can I talk to them alone? Kim said. She gave Kylan's students a dirty look. Don't pull any tricks. We won't stand for it. Not to worry, I told you, we came here to help your husband. Stephen and Kylan's students relocated to the conference room. Go ahead. Why did Kylan tell you to come here? Kingsley handed him an antique box. We're here to deliver a medicine that will speed up your recovery. Stephen opened the box and caught the scent of the medicinal herb.